Wanted to welcome Peter Sorckoff, who is with me. He is the Chief Creative Officer and the Senior Vice President of Marketing for the Atlanta Hawks and Phillips Arena. So welcome, Peter. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So, Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? I know you've been with the Hawks for a long, long time, and I think you mentioned that you were moved here to Atlanta to work for the Hawks a long time ago. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how this came to be, how you came to work for the Hawks, and we'll go from there.
Well, it's a little bit of a strange story. In '99, I was actually recruited by Turner to come down and help them build out their new hockey team. They actually got an NHL franchise in '98. '99 was the first year that they were going to actually take the ice and start playing. And so I'm Canadian, and in those days, Turner wanted to pull a staff together of some experienced people who had been in the business for a while. And so they pulled some people from Boston and New York and Toronto and Calgary.
The hockey towns.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, unfortunately at that time in this town, there weren't a lot of people with sort of deep background in hockey. So that's what brought me to Atlanta in '99. And then Turner started to sort of spin off what they called non-core assets in '03, '04, and so their sports teams, the Hawks, the Braves, and the Thrashers, were actually all packaged up and sold. And at that time, the team who bought the hockey team also bought the basketball team, and they really liked what we had done on the hockey side and asked if we could essentially do that for the basketball team as well. So really, for about the next 6 years, we actually handled both franchises at the same time, which was always kind of interesting because they actually played at the same time. Their seasons only overlapped by a month on the front and back end, so we were always kind of running both teams literally at the same time. So it was
winding down marketing for one team as you were ramping up for the next.
It was almost exactly like that. So it was it was a little tricky in terms of planning cycles and things like that. And I kind of liken it to having two kids. You have to make sure that everybody kind of gets balanced properly, but very different personalities and very different requirements for both of them.
Awesome. So talk to me quickly about the marketing of the Hawks and how that maybe varies and is different from the marketing that the NBA does on behalf of all of the teams. And then I'm also curious about how you distinguish between, what you view as the competition for the Hawks. Is it Falcons and Braves and other sports? Is it the aquarium and Six Flags and other entertainment? Or kind of where do you, so those are two different questions. I'll let you.
So I think the league is obviously very aware of what all the franchises are doing, but they're really marketing the game. And, the 30 of us sort of make up the game, but they're very careful about making sure that some of the regional differences and some of the, there's a lot of nuances city to city. I mean, Atlanta is very different from New York, which is very different from LA, which is very different from Milwaukee. And so there's a lot of nuance in there that I think the league does a really good job of staying above at 30,000 feet to sort of drive interest in the game. And I think that also gives them the opportunity as different franchises and different star players are emerging to be able to sort of ramp up where and how they tell those stories to get the national audience excited. At the team level, I think it's very different because you can really dive into what those nuances are in your market and what your audience looks like in your market, which, again, city to city in this country can be very, very different. And, some of it is the history of the market, too, not just with the game, but the history of that market in general sort of speaks to what your strategy really has to become. So, it's really, to me, kind of fascinating work because if you think about professional sports in particular, and I think, this sort of leads to your next question about who the competition is, it's a completely discretionary spend for the consumer. They're not going to live or die without NBA basketball. I would like to believe that they would, but we all know that's not the case.
Well, some of them maybe, but yeah.
That's right. There are maybe a couple out there that actually is true. But really, everything that we do is predicated on making some form of emotional connectedness with that customer, because logic really, it doesn't make sense to buy the product, because frankly you can turn on a television and as long as you're paying your cable bill in most respects, you're getting the game for free. And so, what is it that's going to drive somebody to actually want to go through all the hurdles that they have to overcome to come down to a stadium and watch it in person? And the expense that comes along with that, it really is summed up in how emotional that they are about the brand. So, when I think about who our direct competitors are, I really don't bucket the Braves and the Falcons or other teams like that as direct competition. Maybe in the sponsorship space, that might be, there's a better case for that. Maybe a little bit on season tickets or membership. But for me, it's really some of the ththings that you mentioned. It's the aquarium, it's golf, it's good restaurants. Sometimes, and for some people, it's movies. And it's all those other pressures that those people have on their disposable dollar. And so all those things can look pretty attractive if we're not doing things to, again, connect with them in such an emotional way that it supersedes whatever passing interest they might have in one of those other activities.
Yeah. So does it make it a lot harder or a lot easier that the team is, for example, doing so well this year? It seems like it would make things a little easier to get butts in seats because they're winning so much, but does that in some ways present new challenges?
Well, it presents first world problems,
yeah.
But those are great problems to have. Those are the ones that we never complain about. Winning absolutely helps. There's no two ways around it. But I don't think you can really capitalize on the help that winning is if you don't have some of those underpinnings in place to be able to really, again, engage the customer in a way that, again, really sort of builds that loyalty and that connectedness to continue overcoming logic, frankly.
Right.
And so, having been in sports for quite a few years now, what I do know is it's very cyclical, right? So everybody's time generally at some point kind of comes. It's like the tide. It ebbs and flows, and while it's maybe not as predictable as the tide, you do know at some point it is going to come, and when the surge comes, you need to be able to really stretch it as long as you can. And so for us, that's not just selling individual tickets. That is, how do we take that and then turn that into more frequency that they're willing to commit to on the front end, which of course is either plans or, in our world, we call it membership.
Right.
And we've really tried to move away from the term season ticket because of the seasonality of it, right? It puts an expiration date on their loyalty when you call it a season ticket.
right. When you're a season ticket holder, it ends at the end of the season. Then what? Does the conversation then end for you? And hopefully it doesn't end. It continues during the off season, right?
Well, it does. And so for us, membership is a year-round proposition. And look, we've looked to other industries to try to get ahead of the curve on this. And if you look at the automotive industry or mobile, you sign contracts, and nobody buys a car anymore based on the fact that it's $40,000. They buy it on a lease payment of $399 a month.
Right.
So for us, we sort of looked at that and said, okay, well, what if we took our business and we broke payment down into 12-month periods, even though our season's only 8? And if we did that, we could actually take the whole concept of renewal out of play, because if somebody bought into that conceptually, they would never have to renew. We would just, until they stepped in and told us otherwise, they would just continue on a monthly pay schedule.
They call that an evergreen plan, right?
That's exactly what it is, right? And again, we're stealing that from other industries. That's not something we're breaking ground on, but I think it works. And I think that, the way that consumers budget today, it works in that space as well, because if you know that, hey, my Hawks tickets are going to be $125 a month or $400 a month, or whatever their appetite is, that's sort of an expense that they can plan for, and they have it allotted against all of the other things like their phone bill or their cell bill or cable or groceries or all those other things, and they know they have all 12 months to pay for it.
Right.
So we've seen incredible success with that, and it's really kind of revolutionary in our industry, just not in others.
Yeah. it sounds like in some organizations there's a real disconnect between marketing and sales. Doesn't sound like that's the case within the Hawks organization. Like you all are all kind of aligned towards membership, which is is sort of you're building a long-term pipeline for membership in the Hawks organization, right?
We are, and when we take a step back and we look at our audience, I think what we know is we always want to be stepping people up. And so you might have great interest in us when you're 18 years old, but you can't afford membership. You're just not in that place in your life. So we need to get them in the funnel. And again, we want to sort of build on that emotional equity with them so that when they do get to that space, we can put a different product in front of them and they're excited to buy it. Right. So they've kind of reached a point in their life where it's almost like a rite of passage to be able to move into this new space and basically take on this kind of new product that they, it's almost been like a target for them. Maybe, I don't know, like the car poster that was on their wall when they were a kid or something like that, and they finally are able to afford it.
Well, I have to use your analogy there. It's like you got to sell them a Scion and then upgrade them to a Toyota, and then upgrade them to a Lexus, eventually.
That's exactly right. And, for us, and I have, with this brand, it hasn't always been like this. And, when we were talking a little bit earlier, we talked about our new CEO, Steve Koonin, who's really, frankly, kind of an amazing marketer, and that's really his trade. Yeah. And so he's very quickly sort of gotten and understood this piece where the relationship with the customer previously, and frankly I think this is like this in a lot of professional sports, is very transactional, and it's kind of hey, we have a game on Wednesday, we have X number of seats we have to sell, so you get out there with a whole bunch of manipulations essentially, or promotions, or to be able to kind of sell those seats. And so if you're not careful, that ends up sort of like the dog chasing his tail where, okay, well, you got through Wednesday, but then there's Friday, and then you get through Friday, and then there's next Saturday. And so what happens is you end up in this, this very transactional cycle with your customer, and it doesn't really leave you any time, again, to build on sort of that emotional connectedness that will break that cycle and, build that deeper willingness to commit to frequency.
Right.
And again, that cycle sucks up a huge amount of emotion, of organizational focus and energy, because you get through the one and it's a big spool up, and then there's just another one around the corner. So we have really, in the last few years, philosophically tried to move into a completely another space as it relates to that.
Sure. So I want to shift gears for a minute. So AgencySparks exists to connect brand marketers with specialist agencies. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions just about, so how do you work with agencies today? What do you look for in a successful agency relationship, and what things you are absolutely are crucial for the Hawks to keep in-house, and what things do you need external help for?
So, one of the things that is crucial for us to keep in-house is strategy. Mm-hmm. If we have to go and hire an agency to basically give us a strategy, I think we're in real trouble. Right. That's just my viewpoint on it. And I feel like that's a pressure that falls onto somebody like me or somebody in my role. Now, having somebody to bounce that off of, having somebody to share that with, to sort of challenge viewpoints on, that I think is very valuable. And partly because, when you're in the forest, sometimes you don't even see the trees because you're right up against everything. And so that objectivity, I think, can be extremely valuable. But for an agency, I think, to really be able to deliver value in that space, they really have to be entrenched in understanding the nuances of our business. And our business is kind of strange. It really is very different than I think a lot of other industries, and I think that makes it challenging for agencies to kind of find their way into sports. Sure.
Now, but there's also the other side of it, which is maybe an agency that has a lot of experience in other verticals might bring a completely different perspective. So I don't know, what's the balance between really knowing your business and really understanding your business with bringing a completely fresh perspective and new thinking that may vary from what you considered in the past?
I think what's tricky in sports is there's a real lack of patience. And part of that goes back to that cycle. And it's a little bit, I don't know, like the airline industry. When the plane takes off, if every seat's not sold, you don't ever get those seats back. They're gone.
Perishable inventory.
Absolutely, you're exactly right. And so I think for a lot of professional sports, they want somebody who's going to come in and help them to take advantage of that perishable inventory, reduce it. And if they're not capable of doing that right away, then sometimes they're graded on that, and it's like, oh, these guys are terrible, they don't get us. Which is, often not the case. They just haven't had enough runway to really be able to kind of, like I said, understand some of those nuances. I think when you get into technology and maybe into the social space, then it's a very different equation, because I think you are absolutely right. Some of those smaller boutique agencies, they know their space so well that one of the things that they're bringing is a level of expertise that, frankly, the team cannot afford to have in-house. And to me, that's a very different proposition.
Right. Yeah. So then how do you ultimately hold your agencies accountable? Is it ultimately ticket sales, or are there other soft metrics that are important, or how do you keep them accountable?
So I think there's both. Ticket sales to me is maybe the ultimate metric, because that's the bottom line. For us, we have a variety of different KPIs that we track together with our agency of record, and that's everything in the digital space, the typical click-through rates. We measure engagement a little different on the social side. There's an interesting metric for us. So our tickets are actually sold by essentially a third-party Ticketmaster.
Right.
Now they're a very, very close third party to us, but they're not a part of our company. And they have a really interesting metric that's called by-page views. And so one of the things that we're able to do with our digital advertising in particular is actually track a click all the way through until they reach Ticketmaster, and then we see whether they click through and convert to purchase, or where they go to shop after that. And then that opens the door up to a variety of other metrics that you can start watching. Did they go to StubHub? Did they, we know how many times we'll get shopped generally by an individual before they'll actually make a purchase. There's a lot of other interesting metrics around retargeting, which is fascinating for me, because what we have found over the last 2 years, 47% of individuals who click on a retargeted Hawks ad convert.
Wow.
Which is a wildly
yeah.
Right? So that helps drive strategy for us, because it's like, okay, you know what, we need to drive traffic to Hawks.com so that we get more fresh blood, fresh DNA that we can then track back for our retargeting, because again, there's all kinds of numbers to show us essentially how many of those retargeted ads we have to get out before someone clicks on average, and then we know what that conversion rate looks like. So there's a variety of metrics like that. And then we also do some surveying, some brand health surveying with them as well, which again is, I think, really interesting, more on the soft side. But I think you really have to be able to merge art and science together to get a real picture of, not just how successful we are in general, but the impact of their help.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of your partnership with the agency or agencies, how do you keep them challenged? Like, how do you ensure that they continue to challenge you and push you? You mentioned bouncing ideas off of them, but are they able to keep coming to you with fresh ideas? And how do you keep them accountable to do that as well?
So we maybe have a little bit of a unique relationship, or maybe I do, with our agency of record. I actually spend about a day and a half a week at the agency.
Wow.
And so that does a couple things. One, it lets me get a lot of things done when I'm not in the office, because people can't get to me in the same way. But what it does is it gets me around everybody. They joke that it was only until last year that some people didn't know that I was the client. They actually at the agency. But what's great about that is it helped to get some of their staff really immersed in our business when I was around, for them to be able to ping with questions, and just when people had ideas kind of off the top of their head, and they could just talk about our business. and get some real-time feedback, like, wow, that's actually really interesting. Like, we should pick up on that. That's kind of really unique. And so some of it, honestly, the success has come just from access. As far as challenging them, I think if they were on this interview with us, they would be nodding their heads that they get
right.
on a regular basis. And part of that is, for me, for them to be successful, they need to understand what our weaknesses are. And so, we're never going to get to strength until we're open about what our weaknesses in our business are. And so, again, to me, that's just a free flow of information, and it builds, again, sort of a real center of trust where, there's some things that we share with our agency that, I don't know, maybe some other businesses wouldn't be comfortable sharing, but it really draws them in and gives them, I think, a deeper sense of that they're really in this with us. And then we share in our successes the same way too. I give our agency a lot of credit for some of the work that they've, really helped shepherd us through, or frankly, concepts that they've brought that otherwise, we either just didn't look at or frankly didn't consider because we didn't pin all the dots together.
Right.
But in their space, they aren't challenged with the same day-to-day pressures, and so that allowed them to actually take it a little further down the road than maybe we would have been patient to ourselves. So they're challenged regularly. I mentioned earlier, those first world problems. The fun part now is we're going back and we're challenging them with some of those problems.
Right.
Have not been our problems over the last maybe 3 or 4
years. We don't have enough bathrooms to accommodate all of the fans that we have in the arena on a daily basis.
Yeah,
that's a good problem to have, right?
Last week, so retail operations actually rolls up, through me ultimately, and I walk the concourse and I go into our main team store, and I will generally pick somebody out and I'll put a clock on them to watch how long it takes them to get through the line. And on a particularly busy night, we had a almost 38-minute wait for. Yeah. And so we went back to the agency because we have a smaller retail group, but they were in the room with the agency, and we started talking like, how would we figure this out? Let's back this up, because there are some real easy no-brainer solutions to that, but then let's take it a step further back. Are we missing the boat on some things? And I don't want to be sort of myopic about, well, bring in more tills, or let's get iPads with squares on them. Little things like that.
Or they could use e-commerce and just show somebody at the door, I just bought this, and walk out or something.
And so, that's not about how do we fix that for next game. That's how do we fix that.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think for an agency that's probably exciting to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Together, have a ribbon at the, arrived at this place. We now get to work on these things.
Right.
Frankly, we've never had scope on before.
Right. So, okay, let me throw a little bit of a curveball. I'm sure you're approached by agencies that want to work with the Hawks all the time.
Yes.
So tell me about one of the most annoying things an agency has done when they approached you, and also if somebody did want to work with the Hawks in some way, shape, or form, what would be the way that would be approach, the best way to approach you in a respectful way that would maybe catch your attention?
The annoying thing is tough because I understand selling, because I think even as a creative, you're selling your ideas.
Absolutely.
And so, somebody who is persistent, it's a good thing, and I would never want anybody to think otherwise. It can be annoying when somebody sends messages as though we've already met before.
Right.
That, to me, that's a really manipulative tactic. That's kind of like, that's an automatic delete for me.
Yeah.
And it is because it's a breach of trust and we haven't even met each other. So if that's how our relationship would start, our relationship can't start. So that would be on the annoying side. On the positive side, I've had some different agencies who have already in advance done, I'll call it strategy work, in that they've sort of looked at our business and said, hey, here's something that we've noticed from the outside, and we got together and kind of talked about this, and we're not sure that it really is a problem. It's just from our viewpoint that it looks to be a problem, and this is how we would help you solve that if in fact it is a problem. Would you be interested in talking about that? Because we would love to work with you guys. Yeah. That's a really different approach for me, and it's a less salesy approach, and this is somebody that, to me, I'm going, wow, okay, that's really kind of interesting. That's That's partner, that's friend, that's colleague, that's, hey, we want to be up to our waist in this with you. And we've brought, frankly, some different agencies on board strictly because of that approach.
Yeah. So let me get this straight. Actually bringing you ideas that might actually help your business is a good way to get your attention?
You know, so it's interesting because it's funny that when you sum it up like that, I think it's kind of like, hey, we have a great solution that works for a lot of other people, so it must work for you somehow. So let's talk about it. And it's like, I don't have time, honestly.
Right.
I'm not maybe seeking that in particular. I'm glad it's working for other people. But don't layer that on me and then try to fit it to me after. I think when somebody has taken the time on the front end to really, again, from their perspective, wherever that is, try to look at our business and say, hey, we have this great technology. How would this help the Hawks? And then come to me on the front end with, here's how we think this might work for you guys. That's, again, just a very different, it's just a very different take. And I think I'm personally much more amenable and open to that. Yeah. And I think most people probably are.
Yeah, there's a great book called The Challenger Sale that I often share the book with folks that are interested in sales. And the point that I always try to make is that whether we realize it or not, we're all in sales. To your point, creatives are selling work. You know, my wife's an attorney and she's selling a trust or a will or something to the client. And you know, my kids are trying to sell me on ice cream after dinner.
Right, absolutely.
So we're all in sales.
Selling all the time.
Yeah, but the Challenger Sale talks about sort of leading with education and with, you know, leading to a solution, not with a solution. And I like the approach that you're talking about is saying, look, I've thought about your business. I have an idea that I think could help your business. Are you willing to hear it? And the answer is probably yes, right?
Yeah. Generally it is, and in particular, if they tease me with enough of it, you know, that's just kind of like, hey, to your point, look, I know you have agencies trying to sell you stuff all day long, but this is how we're different, and here's a little taste, basically. Yeah. So yeah.
Great. All right. Well, so I have one last question: is tell us a little bit about Peter, and what do you like to do in your free time? Do you have any major hobbies or anything that we should know about?
Wow, let's see. This has been a really busy year. I feel like I have to get reacquainted with my hobbies. I love to golf. It's a great way for me to just kind of unwind, and you know, it's one of those rare things that I feel like to do it well, you have to be like 100% in it. So I'm the kind of personality that those are the kind of things that I really like, when I have to like give it 100% of my focus. Golf, I like to run. I have 3 little girls. They keep me really busy, so I don't know that I would consider them a hobby, but yeah. But they probably are the biggest source of my time. So best way to get my batteries recharged. Great.
Well, I really appreciate the time, Peter. And what we'll do is this is going to be posted on AgencySparks on our blog, and then we'll send you a link so you can share it. But we really appreciate the time and sitting down and talking to us.
Terrific. Absolutely. I'm happy to do it.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
You bet.